When brands start reaching out to you as a content creator, it is honestly such an exciting feeling. But then you get a contract from them, and it has all of these legal terms you've never heard of and tons of clauses that can honestly be confusing and overwhelming. Today we're talking all about influencer contracts and working with brands, and I've brought on a creator lawyer today to help me answer all of your burning questions. If you're new here, I'm a fashion and beauty micro-influencer based in New York City, and I use this channel to help you create great content, grow your digital brand, and earn sustainable income from content creation. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you already know that I encourage you to really read through your contracts when you're working with a brand to understand what exactly you're agreeing to. But it's one thing to say that and another thing to know what terms to look out for, what certain phrases mean, and also what to do if the brand isn't following through on a contract that you've signed. I'm chatting about all of this and more with today's special guest, Veronica Ramirez. Veronica is the founder of Curator Counsel, a firm dedicated to providing effective legal representation to content creators. Veronica has previously worked as a commercial litigator. Since launching her firm in 2021, she has represented numerous creators and empowered them to navigate brand contracts and negotiations and ultimately protect their creative work. I have personally hired Veronica to help me with some of the legal components of my business before, and my favorite thing about her is how she helps me understand all of these legal terms and jargon and really break it down so I'm clear on what exactly is going on. We're so lucky to have her for today's conversation. So with that, let's get into our Q&A. All right, everyone, I'm back again with Veronica from Curator Counsel. We are so excited to have her here to talk to us about working with brands and influencer contracts and all of that stuff. So I'm going to pass the mic to her for a quick disclaimer and we'll get right into your questions.
Thank you so much, Austen. And thank you everybody for your great questions. Really, it's so awesome to see how people are very curious about legal and how it really intersects with, being a creator. Now, I did see that there were a few specific questions, and while I would love to answer them all, this video, the purpose of this, conversation that I'm having with Austen is really to have a more educational, general informational conversation about legal and being a creator. So if you do have specific questions, you do want those answers, I would highly recommend that you consult an attorney.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Veronica. Let's jump right into the first question, which is really a term that we see pop up time and time again in our contracts, which is usage rights. So can you briefly walk us through what usage rights entail, like what a content creator is agreeing to when we agree to a contract that gives the brand usage rights of our content?
Sure. So usage rights generally govern how it is that a brand will be able to use your work. That may define the scope of the usage. Like it may say, hey, it's going to happen on socials. It's going to happen on our website. It's going to happen on newsletters. It could be super broad. It could be something like in any media known or hereafter developed. That's very common to see. Or it could be very specific, it will happen on these channels for this amount of time. And after that, we're done. So it's going to change. It's going to be specific to each contract, but generally speaking, it's just talking about how it is that a brand, once your content goes live, how is it that they can use the content that you create for them?
Yeah, and I think there's a big difference between organic usage and paid usage, because I personally don't mind if I create content with a brand and they want to turn on the collab feature on Instagram, like where we both organically post it. But when it comes to putting money behind our content, that's kind of activates a different area of usage rights, right?
100%. And it's super helpful to know the difference, right? And to know specifically whether or not they're asking for, organic versus, paid usage. Sometimes you'll see some contracts that don't necessarily say one way or the other. So it's important to make that distinction, or at least understand what it is that the brand wants out of this before signing. And if there is a conversation around paid usage and stuff like that, whether that's happening before you get to a contract or while you're discovering it while you're looking at the contract, definitely bring it up and definitely, ask for an adjustment.
Yeah, redlining contracts is something that I don't know if all influencers know that you can do. You can absolutely read through these things, go back to the brand and ask to make updates to it. And one thing that I'm always particularly on the lookout for when I look through my contracts is the word perpetual or
perpetuity as it relates to things like usage rights. What does in perpetuity mean? Can you break it down for us?
Yeah. So perpetuity has to do with a duration of time, and perpetually means forever, right? It has nothing to do with the scope. So it's super important to understand the context in which the word perpetuity or perpetual are used, right? It'd be one thing if the brand is saying, hey, like, once this content goes live, we will have the right to keep it up on our historical feed or for archival purposes in perpetuity, right? That's fair, right? Like you want to have some evidence that you've worked with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere online apart from your own channel. So that makes sense. It's different when we're talking about other uses, right? Like it's not for historical purposes. It's not just so that you can keep it on the feed forever. It's now we're getting into how long they can use your content for other purposes like organic or paid purposes. And that's where, perpetuity should, kind of raise some flags for you, like raise a little bit of a little alarm, something. And then have that conversation, right? Have that conversation with the brand to say, we need to adjust this and find the right solution that works for your campaign with your partner. But yeah, that definitely make sure that you understand the context.
Yeah, perpetuity just drives me nuts for so many reasons. It's impossible to price for one. Like, are you going to continue to pay my offspring for content that you're still using and making money
Right.
off of? What happens if the company gets sold or has a new CEO, trades hands, becomes a company you don't want to be associated with anymore? But I feel like we could honestly do a whole other video about that. So let's move
Mm-hmm.
on and get back into contracts. I think one issue that a lot of not just influencers, but actually just freelancers in general run into is late payments or someone not paying the person who they hired to do the work in the time frame that is specified in a contract. Often for us, it's net 30 or net 60, meaning 30 or 60 days after the project is actually completed. So do influencers and content creators have any kind of legal grounds or any leg to stand on when it comes to trying to get a late payment, trying to recover that from a brand partner?
Yeah. So I'll start with the standard response that all attorneys say, and it depends, right? It depends on what your contract says. So from a negotiation standpoint, if you expect that there will be some, delay or something like that, then maybe it's worth trying for a late fee, trying to negotiate in a late fee for a delay in payment, right? So that could compensate you for that, that wait. The other thing, in the event that doesn't happen, right? That's not in play. You have to look at what your contract says to see what your rights are and what you can do in the event of a dispute. Because if the brand's not meeting its end of the deal, that's a breach, right? That is a breach of contract, right? So what are your remedies, right? Usually that's going to be defined in your contract, right? It's going to be under something like governing law, dispute resolution. Those two terms in particular are relevant because you need to know where can you sort this out if you have to escalate this, what law applies in the event that you have to escalate this, and then what are your mechanisms, right? Like, can you go to court? Do you have to go to arbitration? Do you have to go to mediation? Do you have to resolve things, before, you can even go there? So that those deal points will basically guide how it is that you would have to address the situation. For the most part, even though that there are these contract terms that would apply, before you kind of go nuclear, right, and say we're going to go to court, right? Court's expensive. It's worth just having a conversation, right? It's worth having that conversation with your contact to say, this was due on X date and we're here and we still haven't received payment. Can you advise us on the status, right? And for the most part, people are human, and that's, unfortunate, right? Because of course you want to get paid ASAP. And when you expect it to, you have bills to pay. But I think it's better to kind of lead with the idea that there are humans behind all of these teams that are working really hard and are working on numerous campaigns to resolve it before, again, going nuclear and, going to court and all that stuff over this, which I think can be resolved pretty easily.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've even learned from the influencer side of this too is often the person who hired you for the campaign is not the person who is actually able to take the money and send it to your account. So sometimes even asking to get looped in with accounting or even the CEO and things like that, there are lots of steps you can take before you might need to actually pursue legal action. So I think it's worth, like you said, trying to catch it ahead and just have conversations.
Yeah. And another thing that's kind of relevant, at least I've been seeing this lately, is you have to also consider whether or not you can even talk to the brand directly, because some contracts actually have something called a non-circumvention clause. And basically what that does is that you are prevented from talking to them directly for like a certain period of time. So definitely be mindful of that, or at least be respectful of that to the extent that you can be, because you also don't want to get into a problem where you unknowingly breached your contract by not looking at those deal terms.
And do you find, would that happen kind of working through a third party platform, kind of like an Aspire type, where they are the middleman between you and the brand partner?
So I've seen, I don't know if I remember that with an Aspire campaign, maybe there was one, but I've seen that with agencies. I've seen that with agencies that are the middleman between the brands. So you're not working with the brand directly. So that's a little tough because, on one hand, you want to maintain a very good relationship with the agency, but if somebody's not paying you and you're not getting an explanation, it can be really hard to work around that and work around their like terms with that. But try the best you can and try to, be respectful of like that dynamic, which is that, they hired this agency to do it and you have to basically take it up with the agency first.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That makes complete sense because I definitely have worked with agencies versus brand direct on campaigns before. And I think even the same advice of maybe the accounting person at the agency is different than the person who hired you for the campaign. So, and definitely read the fine print of your contracts. I think that will be the general theme throughout our conversation to encourage creators to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's discuss what to do if a brand is using your content without permission. Say one day I log on to Instagram and I see a brand is using a reel that I created as an ad, and I'm just kind of confused. So I also want to break this question down into if you have a relationship with the brand, like maybe if they've hired you, but paid usage was not part of your contract. And if you don't have any kind of relationship with the brand, and maybe two different ways to go about it. So let's start out with, what if a brand that I've worked with but did not ask for paid usage rights in our contract is using my content?
Yeah, I think that they're in that situation. It's a fairly straightforward conversation. You go back to your brand contact and you address it. You escalate it. You say, I see that this is happening per our agreement. XYZ. We did not, agree to this. My rate for this, if you want to continue using this, is this. You can pay me, or you can take it down immediately. That is the most, like, I would say the most like assertive approach that you can take, right? I think option two, right? So let's say that maybe you really want to nurture this, right? Like maybe you're in your heart of hearts, like, these people don't mean, anything bad, right? And I know that it's hard, like it's a corporation, all this stuff, right? But again, there are still humans that are like managing this campaign. So I really like to think about it from a human first approach when talking to teams, is, saying, hey, like, I did see this and we have a contract that says this, like, can you advise on like what's going on? Right? Like, can we have a conversation about this? Right? Maybe you'll be able to have like a one-on-one conversation with your brand contact, and maybe you'll be able to kind of resolve it, face to face, depending on your style, right? Depending on, again, who are the personalities that you're dealing with, right? If you have somebody that's maybe a little more assertive, or maybe somebody that's like a little more like, you could tell they're maybe not as experienced and stuff like that. So mistakes happen. Like, your approach will have to like kind of adjust accordingly. But at the end of the day, you want to set that boundary as a creator. You don't want to be taken advantage of. So it's only fair to say, this is my invoice, and you can continue to use it for a month, but that's about it. Or set whatever boundaries you need to make. But at the end of the day, it's worth raising the issue and talking to the team about it and figuring out a solution with them.
Yeah, and I think benefit of the doubt, as you've kind of alluded to, is really big because it is such a small industry, and burning a bridge can be kind of detrimental. So even if you see something that you guys didn't agree to this, I should be compensated for this, I think taking that time to just approach them, have the conversation is the smart move overall, because you will likely still find some kind of resolution, whether that's the content getting removed or you getting paid for them to use your content. And you don't have to use a term we've used earlier, go nuclear and kind of blow up the whole relationship. So that totally makes sense. And would it be kind of a similar process, would you say, if you don't actually have a relationship with the brand? And is there any even potential opportunity to kind of get in with the brand and then say, oh, I see you guys like my video, why don't we actually set up a real partnership here?
Absolutely. I think that, it doesn't have to be, I can't believe this brand, took my stuff and like, now I have to like scorch the earth to like prove my point. I think that if you have talked about them, right, and you are sharing content that you genuinely enjoyed this brand's products or services, and they took it and they took it without your permission and posted it on their page, it's an opportunity, right? They notice you. So I think it's worth trying the, hey, I see that you like my content. Like typically when I'm working with brands and they want to repost my content, I charge this. Would love to get on the phone with you though, to like figure out like ways that we can work together, right? That approach is much better and more well received than just, filing some sort of like, report with Instagram or TikTok. They have like reports that you can do for copyright infringement and then doing nothing else. If you like them in the first place, why not create that? Like, why not use that as an opportunity to create like that relationship and see if there is room to maybe work together, maybe not this time, right? Maybe you'll just give them a free pass and maybe figure out something on a paid basis in the future.
That makes total sense. Thank you for breaking that down and even giving us some kind of guidance and verbiage that we could maybe pull from in the future if we ever find ourselves in a situation like that. So another component of doing a paid brand partnership is making sure that you're disclosing your relationship with the brand to your audience. So can we talk a little bit about FTC disclaimers and how influencers should be letting their audiences know when they're being paid to share something with them?
Yeah, so we have the Federal Trade Commission who basically oversees things like advertisements, right? And part of their job is to make sure that consumers are aware of when they're seeing an ad versus like organic content, especially in channels like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, etc. Because without that disclosure, without that, thing that kind of tells the audience like, hey, I'm talking about this because I have a connection with the brand, it would be really hard to tell, right? You're going to look at your feed and you're just going to think that this is just another post that you're just kind of scrolling through, right? So the point of these disclosures is to tell your audience what your connection is with the brand. So the disclosure should reflect that. So we see a variety of those, right? And the most popular is #ad or ad, before getting into the substance of a caption, add in, somewhere as a text overlay in a video. But there are others, and that it again has to just represent like what the relationship is. Like maybe you're an affiliate, so maybe it might be like brand affiliate, or maybe you're, working with them on a gifted basis, so it's like, gifted, right? That disclosure is going to change depending on, what the nature of the relationship is, the connection is between you and the brand. Another thing to think about though, like apart from what the disclosures say, is like what it is that you're sharing about the product, because that's another area where people can get into trouble. We see this a lot with like health and wellness products, right? People making claims about like weight, like, significant weight loss, I'm immune, like all of these like different claims. But like at the end of the day, even though that might be your personal experience, maybe that skincare product that you use cured your eczema. Maybe that happened, right? But that might not be the case for everybody. So even though that might be your experience, the brand has to also be able to say and confirm that, yeah, we can make that as an ad because that is the same for everybody else. So you have two things to be aware of, right? The disclosure, right? The #ad, the #gifted, all that stuff, but also like whatever it is that you're saying or claiming about the products, right, or services that you're talking about, they also have to line up with the brands, like research the brands, like own data about their products. And again, this usually is happening a lot with like, you know, wellness, beauty, all that stuff. Like you want to make sure that whatever claims you're making are going to be supported by the brand's own like research data and all that stuff.
I actually hadn't really thought a lot about that second point that you brought up there, but it obviously makes sense, especially if the brand does want to boost your post or does want to use your content on their channels for any reason. So those alignments are more important than I think we even realize. And I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I see it a lot. And I do see that a lot again with like the like wellness stuff, just because, you know, it's really hard to know for a fact that like something is going to give the same or provide the same results, because it's going to be just unique to a person's like, you know, own like health situation and stuff like that. So that's really why we usually see that the claims, like the substance of what people are saying about products, being taken like at issue with the FTC, because they're like, well, cool, I'm glad that happened for you, but like, did that happen? Brand, has that happened with everybody else? That's a conversation that a lot of brands don't really talk about, because for the most part, people aren't really selling that, but they should be mindful of it because it applies.
Yeah, and that even ties into one of the larger reasons that I love this whole industry too, is every creator's own unique perspective and experience, because some people have a product that they love that others might hate. I am in the very small minority of people who cannot stand the smell of the Glossier You perfume, even though I love Glossier and a lot of their other products. It smells like fresh, powdery diapers to me, and it smells amazing on every other person. So it really can come down to your own individual experience. And even saying that in your content, saying, you know, this product didn't work for me, but I have dry skin. If you have oily skin, I could see how you might like this product. And adding your own anecdotes to your content not only makes it more personable, but can even, you know, speak to your own experience with a product and come in handy in a situation like this.
Yeah, that's like me and like the Rare Beauty concealer. Like that's not me. It's not for me. But do you?
But the girlies love it.
The girlies do love it. They stand for Rare, and I love Rare, but I'm like, that's the one product I can't get behind.
That makes total sense. So let's move on to talk about a little bit more about contracts, because I hear more and more creators who are actually taking action to hire attorneys to develop their own contracts for working with brands, which I think is actually great. But what do you do in a situation where maybe you have your own contract, or even if it's not a contract, your own set of rules in your head, right? Where maybe you don't go over 12 months of usage, maybe you don't agree to exclusivity in the beauty space since that's your main space. Maybe you have these kind of preset rules or things you want to do. Then if you have a brand send you a contract for a partnership, do you use your contract? Would you use their contract? How do you kind of get from two down into one and make sure that you're getting what you want there?
Yeah, so usually when there are two contracts involved, it is a very unlikely that a brand is going to accept a creator's contract. For them, it's really about consistency, especially if they already have deal terms that they can, you know, agree to. And also they may have rules of their own internally where they're like, yeah, if they push back, like we'll give them this, like it's fine. Like they have their own framework that they're going to be using based off of their contract about what they are willing to kind of like negotiate and all that fun stuff, right? But if you do have rules, like you do have expectations that you want built in, then that's where redlining is super important, right? And important to make sure that you can fit that in a way that's like almost like a natural part of that document. It's a little hard, you know, especially when you're a creator and you're just like, I don't know, does this make sense? But I think that the core of it is make it clear. Like whatever those changes are that you want to make, just make it clear. You don't have to make it fancy. You don't have to add like words that you wouldn't ordinarily use with your best friend. Like, don't do that. You just make it straightforward and clear. These are the changes. This is where I'm going to make them where it's relevant, right? So don't try to make the changes like, you know, in one area of the contract. Like try to make them within those natural parts of it. So if it has to do with usage, you want 12 months, then you would go into the usage section and, you know, adjust the term, right? And that's basically how you would kind of do it with other terms that you're like looking to change, is do it within those specific sections. And if it doesn't exist, then add it, right? Because there are going to be deal terms where you're like, where is the limitation of liability clause? It doesn't exist. And it's not uncommon that it doesn't exist, but then you would just add it. So that would be like another thing to do if you don't see it.
I think one thing I just realized as you were talking too is it might be easier to have your own contract or get what you want when working with a smaller brand versus a big corporation where they probably have their own in-house legal teams who are making these contracts. And like you said, really trying to have that uniformity of we're getting everyone to agree to this as we have it written and as we want it to be done. But if you're working with maybe a smaller brand or an up and coming brand, you might have a little bit more flexibility to say,
yeah,
I see you guys have asked for this. That's really not something I agree to. Or they might even, again, if they don't have their own legal team or anything like that, if they say, can you provide us with a contract and you have one already, then that could really speed up that process and guarantee that you're getting everything that you want there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially for like indie brands and stuff who don't have that yet. It's a great way to be able to say, well, here's my contract. This is what I like. This is what I like to see. And then it's up to the brand to negotiate it. It's up to the brand to make changes and stuff like that. But you don't have to do anything. You can literally just say, these are my deal points. So take it or leave it, or we can change it, based on whatever it is that's going on.
Awesome. And then I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here, to be honest, but are there any other red flags or things that you would suggest influencers keep an eye out for when they are reading contracts and to make sure that they're legally protected?
There's a lot, but I think that one thing that sticks out to me is exclusivity or non-compete provisions. Only because those provisions can really hurt you if you're not careful as a creator. And here's how. If you as a creator are only working with a brand on a short-term basis and they're asking for exclusivity well beyond the term of your agreement, that means that like well beyond the term of your agreement, you can't work with competing brands. And that depends on how specific or broad that non-compete or exclusivity provision is, right? They could say something as general as anything in the like hair and beauty, anything in the hair and beauty industry. Like that is a lot, right? But if you're naming names, right, you're saying you can't work with Tresemme or you can't work with, oh my God, is Herbal Essence still a thing? Herbal Essence, like all these other like brands that, are kind of like, okay, sure, I won't work with them for X amount of time and stuff like that. But they're a red flag because of the term, and they also can be a red flag because maybe that wasn't brought to your attention before. So now you have to go back to the brand and say, we need to modify this, or we need to get more money to make this worth my while. Because as a creator, like you don't want to leave money on the table. You don't want to, kind of sit out on things that you should be able to do as a part of your business. So it's super important to make those changes or have that conversation with your brand team to see if you can figure out a solution that works.
And I think that's so important too, because even if you're a creator in the beauty space like me, maybe exclusivity is worth more in the beauty space. Maybe I'm going to charge more for exclusivity within beauty because that really does limit my scope of work versus if Stanley Cups, which I love, obviously reached out and wanted to be the wanted to work with me and didn't want me to work with any water bottle brands while I was working with them. That would be very easy for me because this is the only cup I use and that's not as big of an ask for me versus a beauty company saying you can't work with any other skincare brands. So I think that weighing what that looks like and thinking about that in your pricing is really important as a creator.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely going to depend on your niche and, zone of genius and where that brand kind of fits within your world, right? Your creative world. So definitely be mindful of that. And of course, be understanding to the best that you can, right? Like it doesn't have to be a scorched the earth deal point. It's just more like, hey, I do see this. And, at this rate, I can't do it, or, I'm happy to do it for this amount of time, but I can't agree to this kind of scope or this kind of duration and stuff like that. So again, it's a negotiation, it's a conversation, it's not court. So let's dial it back and be people first before going nuclear.
I think being people first is a great note to wrap this up on. So thank you all again so much for submitting your questions. And thank you, Veronica, for sitting down and taking some time to share your expertise and insights on all things working with brands and influencer contracts. If people want to connect with you or follow up with you on anything, where can they find you?
They really can find me on basically every social media platform, not every, but they can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and even YouTube under the name Curator Council. It's at curator_council. So you can find me there. And yeah, super excited. Thanks for
Thank you
having me.
so much. We really appreciate it.
I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Veronica. Honestly, even after being in this industry for over 10 years, I still learned a lot, and there's always still more to learn and navigate, especially when it comes to our relationships with our brand partners. I've been loving doing these videos where I bring on experts to my channel to answer questions. So if there are any other experts or things you'd like to see in this type of series, definitely leave me a comment and let me know. If you have any specific follow-up questions pertaining specifically to you and your influencer business, definitely reach out to Veronica. I'll leave her contact information on the screen and down below. She is never more than a DM away. Don't forget to check out my free guide, The Influencer Launchpad, if you are currently starting and scaling your influencer business. And if you'd like to see my previous conversation with Veronica, where we talked all about the legal side of setting up your influencer business properly, be sure to check out the up next recommendation on the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.